Jason, first of all, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no
you know, I
worries.
was I was reading about your the building you bought in Glendale in 2015, and I couldn't stop thinking
I'm
about it.
here right now. Yeah, I'm here right
So
now.
so there's some serious history to this place, right? So
Yeah.
could you break that down for me, because I'm not even going to attempt to talk about the significance of where you are right now. Just talk a little bit about that building.
Well, it was an old like machine shop or something. It's in the area. It's in Glendale, but you'd think it was actually Burbank. It's a block from the Burbank line. The right across the street, literally directly across the street, is where McLovin tried to buy beer in Superbad. If you've ever seen that movie,
Get out of here! That's across the street from where you are now.
Yeah, but yeah, that's the famous Superbad place. So you could actually see my studio. It's red at the time in the back of those scenes behind it, but so it was a machine shop, and then it got and then it was built, I think, in like the late 70s, around 78 or something like that. It became a studio. I forgot the guy's name, something Dodge. Built it for a few years, and a number of things happened out of here. I mean, the list of things that had happened in this room were like, James Brown, Living in America. Some of that was recorded here. I know it was written here. Some Beach Boys, Michael Jackson, all sorts of rad stuff. And then more modernly, before I bought the building, like that, Wake Me Up and whatever song that is. I actually heard it yesterday. I was like, oh, this was recorded at my place. I forgot. I don't know who that is, but that was before my time here. I bought the building in 2015, and it was in disarray. It was like the control room was basically the same, which was killer because it was built at a time when recording studios were making millions of dollars. So it was like really nicely built, custom, killer, tuned out room. And it was one of the reasons why I bought it. And then I redid sort of the main live room to match a little bit of the sort of old, which is now East West, the old cello and the, was it United? Was it called United? Bill Putnam room. So I kind of designed it like that in the live room. And I've redesigned the whole studio in different ways, like knocked out walls and ceilings and this and that. But it was at one point, it was like a grow room, as there was like a couple of grow rooms in some of the B that are sort of like now B rooms, like in terms of the marijuana and stuff. Yeah. It had a lot of life, but it's always been a studio since 78. And a guy named Charlie Midnight, who wrote Living in America and a bunch of stuff, it was primarily his spot that he worked out of, and he did like Barbra Streisand and all these other like iconic people. The list is huge. You'd have to actually look at the website to see, what all this stuff had come out of here. And I don't even know what records, Doobie Brothers, Beach Boys, as I said, Michael Jackson. And then since I bought the place, there's been, Killers have done some stuff out of here, and Empire of the Sun, and I don't know how, but they found me tons of stuff. But primarily, it's my shop basically. I'm usually so busy that I kind of block it out most of the time, but then allow my friends and other people that want to rent it out to do sessions here whenever I'm not busy. So
yeah, that's awesome. Speaking of living in America, this side, totally random.
Yeah. I heard it yesterday. Matter of fact, it came on the radio as well, and I was like, oh yeah, this.
What an amazing backstory to the place you're in. What about you have another great? I mean, I'm not gonna go down nostalgia road forever, but Jesus, you got a nice history with Bowie too, which is so impressive, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't find this out until he died, but we played his last show, which was at this Black Ball event. It was like it's AIDS in Africa charity event with Alicia Keys and him. And he personally asked us to play because at the time, this was way back in, I want to say 2006, and which was surprising because that was the last show he ever played live. But I only read about that when he passed away. But he was a huge fan of my band Louis XIV and was super sweet. And he gave basically, I think, a series of interviews with Condé Nast magazines, or maybe it was just one that was in tons, but I read it and it was in a number of them, like Vanity Fair and this and that. I think in 2005, where he basically was asked about Kaiser Chiefs and who else, Arcade Fire and stuff like that, like the sort of new bands are out, and his response was sort of like, "Oh, they're okay, but Louis XIV is my favorite new band," kind of a
Wow.
quite an honor, and he was just a gent, and he's amazing. I mean, I was such a huge fan. I still am, of course, of his work and his chameleon-esque ways. And, I was I still am again, a big T-Rex fan and big Bowie fan. And I just love those records, Life on Mars, Hunky Dory is, probably my favorite record, that kind of a thing. So,
yeah,
but that was amazing for him. To be honest with you, I kick myself for not taking more advantage of that situation and doing a lot of work with David when I think I had the chance. But brilliant man and so graceful and so sweet and nice. And,
Jason, why do you think that was? Do you think you just got caught up in life? Do you think you just never really fully realized the magnitude of, he might be gone? Like,
100%. That's exactly it. You never know until, as you grow up, you also see things that like, oh, these were huge opportunities I didn't necessarily capitalize on. Like, there's lots of that in life. Hopefully it doesn't kill you, in terms of like regrets. But no, that's one of those things that it's sort of like when you're a kid, you're just like, you're touring the world, you're making records, there's all this pressure on you, there's all this stuff that you don't know how to deal with, how to understand, how to navigate record companies and press and just all of it, the business of it. Suddenly you're like going from like Mr. massively broke musician to suddenly there's some money around, and you're like trying to figure out, you're just trying to juggle all sorts of shit that you've never dealt with in your life that you work to get to, but like all of a sudden it's a little bit of an overload, and trying to navigate all of that can be really difficult, so you do it best you can, and then later on in life as you grow up you go, oh yeah, gosh, I should have just taken 6 months and said, hey David, let's make a record, let's, and I bet he would have said yes. So but in hindsight, I just didn't take advantage of it. There's things like that every once in a while you go, you cringe a little bit. Or that's not a cringe one. That's more of like, but like there's other ones where you go, fuck, well, I was naive, or I was a child, or whatever it is,
right.
But that's life. You live and learn, and you ideally get better as a human being the older you get. You get more humbled, you get you get more comfortable in your own skin, I think. And then so you start to actually realize, oh, those things I should have done, or this or that. I luckily don't have that many regrets,
Well, that's good, but you're right though. It is live and learn, and it's always easy to say, "Oh, I should have, I could have, I would have." If you live in the past, you'll eventually end up there. So yeah, I totally agree.
That's a good one. Yeah,
Jason, what is your how did you develop the relationship with the Killers? Right, because I'm not going to pretend to be some big vocalist or knowledgeable in bands. I mean, I know what I know, but Killers, like, supremely underrated. How'd you develop a relationship with that?
I mean, they're oddly enough just in the papers the other day, or the news feeds, their song Mr. Brightside became the most streamed song of all time. I don't know if it was in Europe or if it was in America or if it was everywhere, overpassing Wonderwall. So
wow.
Which is crazy, right? I mean, that's nuts. I read that, it was like the headline just the other day. We became really good friends because we had the same booking agent in the beginning. So who now runs William Morris, Kirk Summer, great guy. But he had sort of come up the ranks as people do at William Morris, where you start in the mailroom, and it's sort of like you work your way up and you work around. Anyway, he had just become an agent after doing all his interning kind of vibes for a year or two. And he had us and the Killers and some other band, Pepper. And so the Killers were just a good 6 months or so ahead of us, I guess, in terms of having music released to the public on a big way, or maybe even a year ahead of us. But so we opened up for him on a tour of California. It was the early days. I remember playing, like we did Sacramento, San Francisco, like just like 5 or 6 dates. And then we came into the Troubadour, and that was like the first day they got a bus, because their thing went really quickly. And within 8 months later, at the end of this first cycle of their first album, I remember we ended up just playing with them constantly. And so we were opening up most of that tour that year, just because we hit it off and became good friends. And we were suddenly going from like the Troubadour, which was like 500-600 people, to an arena in Florida, in like Tampa or something. It was like the last day. And I remember just going like, what a wild ride going from, actually the first show was like Orangevale, this heavy metal joint. I forgot the name of the place, but outside of Sacramento, that was, probably at most 300 people, but probably 200 people, to an arena that holds 20,000 people or 25,000 people or whatever it is in Florida by the end of that year, 8 months later. But we really hit it off. And I was always, when I was on the road, I would get really bored. I just need to create. One of the reasons why I really kind of stopped touring ultimately was because I just wanted to be in a studio making music all day long. And when you're on the road, the only sort of glimmers of making new music is sort of like changing up my guitar solos every night. They would never be the same. I've never really even learned too many licks as far as I can remember, let alone my own. And so like everything's always off the cuff. So that would be the little thing. And but you get stifled as somebody like myself who just constantly likes to make stuff and create stuff, whether I'm gardening or building a room or making some sort of musical instrument or making music or or painting, whatever it is. I gotta always do stuff. And I'm not ADHD in that way. I just constantly feel this need to make stuff, to create. It's just my life's calling. And so on the road I get really bored, and so I'd carry a lot of ridiculous amounts of recording gear with me. And so when we got to the point where we were in a bus, the whole back of the bus had all sorts of like stuff I shouldn't have taken on the road, like old Pultecs from the 60s and rattled, like U47s that are like, $30,000 microphones, and like stuff that I really should have taken, not this stuff. But when we signed a record deal, the way we structured it was, you just give us a bunch of money and I'm going to buy a bunch of recording gear and then own that so we can make 1 million records. And I produced all of our records. And so like, it was all our, like, we had learned from bands before, like a band before that signed a record deal, that the only time I ever worked with a producer, which was, I was super unhappy with that situation. And I said, look, only way I'm ever going to work with anybody is if I can produce the stuff and, we make all the decisions as a band. And so, a lot of the gear that I have here, I bought after signing a big record deal with Atlantic Records. But anyway, so I'd have all this gear in the back of the bus. And so like Brandon would come around and we write songs in the back of my tour bus and, our tour bus. And, so we demoed out a lot of, or several of their songs, at least 4 or 5 of them, and for Sam's Town in the back of that bus. For Reasons Unknown and what were the songs? I don't know. A bunch of them though. I remember even like having like Ronnie Vanucci's like drums up in the back of the bus and him playing like backwards, like where the hi-hat and the kick drum, because there's not a lot of room there. And you have the generators buzzing, and but we're like tracking the drums for it. It's a rad demo, actually. That was for Reasons Unknown. And so when it came time then for them, they started recording at the Palms Casino in Vegas for Sam's Town, their follow-up to the first one, to Hot Fuss. And they invited us over to sing and, just do stuff on the record. So we went out there for like a week or two, and Flood and Mulder were producing that record. And so we're singing all over, me and Brian from Louis XIV are singing all over that record and backups and all sorts of stuff on a bunch of songs. And then over the years, we just be friends. So my friends, so we've written songs. I wrote songs for Brandon's solo record and co-produced them and stuff, and just over the years we've just done lots of just different things. But we became really tight, touring around the world together, having fun, and just kind of came up at the same time. And I'm still really good friends with Mark, the bass player, always records out of here. He just moved into LA about a year ago, and anytime he has to, like, he was just working on a new Killers track a week or so ago, and he came in here to use the studio. And
that's great.
They're great guys, and they were a terrific band, and they were fun to tour with all those. Like, we did so many tours, European. I'm pretty sure we did Australian dates with them. Yeah, we did. Tons of US, Canada, you know. I think we did at least like 3 or 4 big tours in Europe, you know, together. So
yeah, that's pretty awesome. You know, before I jump into the life of a composer, you know, I always see these lists that come out, Jason. Rolling Stone comes out with them, top best guitarists ever.
Yeah,
you know those lists, right? So I won't ask you that, but I will ask you this. Who is a guitarist that you absolutely love that should be at the top of anybody's list? Wow. And maybe one, Jason, that we don't hear about that should be on the list.
Sure. I love, you know, Keith Richards. I love John Lennon as well. He had a great style to him. Guys you might consider more rhythmic players, but really fucking great. Who do I like? Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, you know, Glenn Campbell's amazing. Let's see who.
Somebody else said his name, Jason. Because I was researching.
He's a radical player.
I never would have.
He was a big session guy too. Played on all those Beach Boy tracks and stuff like that. He actually toured with the Beach Boys for a little while. I'm a huge Glenn Campbell fan. I like country music in that world up until like basically around the urban cowboy era, which I still like that stuff too. Sort of like the early 80s country. From that before, I'm a big fan of. And then a lot of the sort of alt country stuff that would come later out in the 90s and stuff. But like, who else? Gosh, who is a good player? I don't know. I'm trying to think who I love.
You think Eddie Van Halen gets? Oh, you think he's overrated in any way? Because I love him. You think Van Halen gets...
you know, it's funny because you know, I'm a man, and I watch YouTube a lot. You know, like in terms of like, because it's like I like entertaining, just whatever it is. I'm watching a lot of YouTubes like how-tos or this thing or that thing, and in my algorithm for some reason it thought I was a big Van Halen fan, which I never really was. I had a couple of their early records, and when Hagar. Because I was sort of coming up, you know, I was still a little kid when like Hagar was the guy, and I never really liked that stuff. Although, to be honest, I do think I did own one of those, like OU812 or something like that. I think it was. And there was like a couple of he'd have a couple of like ballad sort of things that I would sort of secretly like, to be honest. But I was like too cool when I was young of like being into these, you know, weird English punk bands, and like, oh, you know who was one of my favorite guitar players actually when I was younger, that I remember being like 14, 15 going, if I can get as good as this guy, then I'm good, which was Bob Andrews from Generation X, which was Billy Idol's first band. And they made one really great record, which was their first one when they were all like 16. And it was really sort of like pentatonic blues, sort of like solos and stuff, but I really dug it. It was really good, really cool, and a really great recording. But I think Eddie's rad. So the only reason I say is so like my algorithms on YouTube have been making me deep dive Eddie Van Halen. To be honest, I looked at it slightly as like a little bit of wank to me, to be honest. Now I have a much bigger appreciation, but totally, which I didn't before. And I totally appreciate him now as the originator and how unique he was. But it was a lot of it was like all of these sort of dudes just sort of copying his thing that sort of ruins it for a kid, for a real young kid that comes into it. It's like, I'm going to run from that. Like anything that everybody's doing, I'm going to run from. Right, like that was just always, you know, like I went to the same high school as Blink 182, right? So like the last fucking thing I was going to be into was like pop punk. I wouldn't have been into that either way, but it was like even more of a revolt because they're so big in this town I'm from. So like, but it was the same thing as like I was a Nirvana fan until like everybody liked Nirvana, and then it was like I had to run from that stuff as like somebody that's trying. When you're younger and a musician, everything you like really defines who you are, you know, because you don't have anything else for one. It's not like I had any money, I couldn't buy anything, but you have basically your clothes and your tastes in music, especially if you're a musician. And so like, so you hold to those, like, oh, like I really like T-Rex. Nobody knows who T-Rex, they're mine, you know, like, or
right.
like Stiff Little Fingers, or like Mega City 4, or these other weird punk bands, you know, like you grab a hold of, like Generation X, or, you know, like these different things that you really dig. And so, and you go in phases. And then by the time I was like 17, I was like getting into Zeppelin and Allman Brothers, and Dwayne Allman became a big thing, you know. And then even Dickie, you realize, oh, that's actually Dickie actually on there. Dwayne's been dead. So like that was Dickie, or like, you know, all this sort of like, or, you know, even guys, you know, who's a rad fucking guitar player? Leon Russell, who you know as a incredible piano player, but actually played rad guitar on a bunch of shit, you know.
Wow.
Like, or Jesse Ed Davis was cool. He played on a lot of that Lennon stuff in the 70s. He's a really cool player as well. There's a lot of these sort of like unsung hero guys, session dudes that were radical, you know. But yeah, anyway.
Underrated, yeah. Speaking of talented dudes, dude, I listen to the Mindhunter soundtrack every once in a while. I love my composition. Dude, Weird Thing is such an awesome track.
Thank you.
That thing hits my soul, man. Like, and I can listen to that one song, man. I mean, you've got a lot of them, but that one piece, it just hits me, man. I love it. I love it.
That's the only one that actually has guitar on. It's one of the rare entities, being a guitar player as my, you know, main instrument when I was younger. It's one of the only pieces of score work that I have ever done that has guitar. Normally I just don't go to a guitar. It's like the last thing I go to. I think probably because it's a comfortable zone, and I don't want to be comfortable, you know, like I want to be surprised at all times. And as a guitar player, you go to shapes, or you go to these things, and you go to these things that, you know, and if you go to instruments and sounds that you aren't familiar with, you'll go somewhere else. But in that one, that particular track was for what we would call, me and Fincher, David Fincher, called his failure theme. So it was Holden, the character on Mindhunter, his failure. Like every time he would have some sort of a failure in life, whether it was his girlfriend breaking up with him, whether it was him failing when he tried to talk the guy from committing suicide and the guy blew his head off, you know, these things where there was a number of them where that theme would come back around. And so anyway, but the thing that's interesting about that track is it's the only one that has a 12-string guitar on it. And it reminded me, I remember my next door neighbor gave me, or I borrowed, or maybe even stole, I don't know. He ended up becoming my manager. He's like a good friend of mine. He was like older, and he'd gone his music taste was a big influence on me and my early singer in my bands before I started singing. Because he'd gone at 18 or 17, he'd gone backpacking around Europe and brought home all these rad punk records and stuff. But he also had Led Zeppelin 3 and 4 on a cassette. And so I remember walking. I'd either go skateboarding or walking around this area near my house that like you'd watch the sunset at night. That was like, or would go down. It was beautiful, and it was like all these really big fancy houses that were being built, but most of the time were just kind of empty lots that with this great view. And I remember listening to Led Zeppelin 3, hearing it for the first time, probably 15, maybe 14. And I remember walking these like streets and these hills and listening to That's the Way and Tangerine over and over again. That's the Way and Tangerine. And Weird Thing reminds me of that moment of listening to those two songs, especially That's the Way, out there in that like field, watching the sun kind of come down. My favorite time of day is like right before the sun goes down.
Yeah.
And just being a kid, and it reminded me so much of that. I don't know why. It's probably the open G tuning. It's open G tuning on Weird Thing. There's a weirdness to it, but there's also something that harkens me back to that. I remember when I played the first like chords, it was, I just instantly had that warm feeling of brought me back to being 14 and skateboarding and walking those hills and listening to that on a little Walkman. And oddly enough, so at the end of the whole season, the first season, Weird Thing was in the climax. It's still in the climax, but then it goes to Led Zeppelin, and as the big climax. Originally, it was all Weird Thing, but Kirk Baxter, who's the editor and an amazing editor on Fincher's stuff, he pulled in Zeppelin, and I always think in my mind, he unconsciously associated that in the same way that I did, and thought, "Ooh, wouldn't Zeppelin be cool right after that?" We've never really talked about it, but I've mentioned it before in an interview or something. But like, so I think he unconsciously picked up on that sort of slight Zeppelin-esque thing that I was picking up on as well. I certainly wasn't copying any Zeppelin. It was just like instantly I played the open G and it was like, oh, it just brought me back to that, you know.
Bro, you just tapped into something. So I want to play for you like a 20-second clip because I have a few questions. Sure. And it's funny because I think you pretty much just set it up. Bro, I cannot believe you just said that. But I want you to see this. It's about maybe 30 seconds.
Sure.
Well, now, that is the truth.
Jason, I remember being blown out of my effing seat when I saw it, because the music composition gives light to Led Zeppelin, you know, and then you hear, then Holden figures out, holy shit, Ed Kemper is a serial killer. Like, he's known it, but he's never really known it. Like, he's kind of always given this guy not the benefit, but he kind of knows it. But he got up close and personal and walked away from Ed Kemper when many people did not.
Yeah,
so
exactly. That's a bit of the emotion right there of like he's been playing with fire a bit and he does what the hell is like he done or something. Yeah.
So the music in that scene, outside of the tremendous acting, for me, is as good as you'll ever see. Like, you go from this awesome score to maybe the best rock band of all time, and this awesome song. Like, dude, just tell me anything about like that scene.
Well, that was
one of my absolute favorite. That's what you were talking.
I said that was ultimately, I believe, Kirk that found that Zeppelin piece. It was originally all a variation of Weird Thing, and then it morphed into sort of like, well, it's the finale of the first season, so if we're gonna go big, like, and big is Led Zeppelin, you know, like big is Led Zeppelin, big's like, because they're also like very expensive moves. Because if you want to like license a Led Zeppelin track, you're talking about a couple $100,000 at least. And
I was going to ask you that. I was going to say that alone, to use that song alone, has to cost Netflix a bundle, right?
Yeah, I don't particularly know exactly what it costs, but other than I probably knew at the time because I'm sure I asked, you know, like, hey, what is this cost? And just like just for sheer curiosity. It's not what I handle. Like normally on all the shows, like I will fight tooth and nail, and I constantly do. And I was bitching about it just this morning, to be honest with you, about a different show that made some terrible fucking choices in some of the music thing. And it's funny because people say it says music by Jason Hill, so they assume that those choices are made by me often, which they're not. On Mindhunter, David Fincher was like, hey, we don't need a music supervisor. You, me, and the editors will do it. Like,
that's awesome.
So
that's awesome.
I did choose a lot of stuff on Mindhunter, but on most shows, it's not. It's a music supervisor and mixed in with like the director and whatnot. But it really, to be honest with you, it's my biggest pet peeve because when a director or showrunner or whomever music supervisor makes bad choices or choices that I just don't like, it infuriates me because I get people asking me all the time, hey, like, what's that song? It's like, I don't fucking know. And I don't even like it. So dumb choice.
Yeah.
You know, I like the more obscure things. And that's what I always try to push on people. And Fincher's great about it because he's got such great music taste that he's always picking ultimately radical stuff. And he's open to us coming in and having ideas and this and that. And smartly, because it's sort of like, I learned, you know, Fincher's the first guy I worked with in the composing world. You know, I worked on Gone Girl, did the trailer and the teasers, and then he asked me to do this show called Videosyncrasy, and then Mindhunter, and then Love, Death, and Robots, and Voir, and a commercial we just did, and all that sort of stuff. But so working with him, he was initially just like, we don't need somebody to pick music for us. And it was like, yeah, of course. Like if I was making a show, like I would be picking all the music. I wouldn't hire some fucking Yahoo to come in and like give me ideas. I mean, sure. So give me some ideas. Okay. That'd be cool. It's good to be fluid and stuff like that. But if you trust your team of like people like myself and other guys like Kirk and, you know, the music editors and stuff, like we all have really interesting different tastes, and like we're gonna bring some cool shit to it as opposed to the real trendy moves or the sort of bad moves that a lot of these like music supervisors do, you know. Like,
I totally agree with you, Jason. It's an unnecessary position. Like if I'm making a show and I trust you, I mean, if I want to get input from somebody, fine. But I feel like that because I was just talking to another composer about, you know, music supervisors, and I'm thinking in my head, like, I feel like this is like an unnecessary thing, like an unnecessary job.
Some people need it because some people have questionable tastes, you know, like they might be a really good filmmaker, but they might have questionable tastes. I think it all goes hand in hand, but some people honestly have bad tastes, or just like very, what I would call like Budweiser taste. It's sort of like, just like nothing against Budweiser, but just like really like they grew up, you know, listening to just the stuff that is like more just common, normal shit, you know, like that doesn't make for usually good moves in film. You want very interesting, eclectic, just interesting moves, you know, as opposed to like, let's stick Foo Fighters or Green Day at the end of it. There's nothing wrong with those bands. They're great, whatever. But like, I mean, it's just like, that's a Budweiser move, or like, or this thing, or like, I could give examples, but then I'm gonna just piss off people. But I have a really I tend to there's a nickname for me, or at least among like Apple TV. Like I get introduced all the time as being very passionate, which really means pain in the ass. You know, because I will like just not quit on when I think people are making bad decisions, especially when it comes to the music, but also when it comes to like the anything, the endings or the this thing or that thing, but especially when it comes to music, and especially on bad music choices like that. Like I will bitch and moan and try my hardest to get them to not make these stupid moves. Most of the time they still do. Sometimes I win out, like usually I win out about half the time, but the other ones will drive me crazy. You know,
how happy were you when this played out the way it did with In the Light and your
score? Mindhunter I have no problems with. Mindhunter was just perfect all the way through. You know, I don't have any problems with any of those because the music choices on Mindhunter were fucking great. I think like ultimately, you know, look, I'm a huge fan, obviously, of Fincher and the way he makes stuff. He gives us amazing amounts of trust when he's working with other artists. You know, he lets me do my thing, and we have a really great back and forth, and I love working with him. And I think he's got just such great taste, and he just tries to push everything to the limits of possibilities until he just basically leaves it all on the floor. He's an incredible general, is the way I would describe him.
Yeah, it's a great way.
Decisions all the time, and leading a pack of people that are going out to war, going out to battle, and want to do their best and want to live at the end of it. And he he's just really great at all that. So I've never had any issue with anything Fincher's actually released.
Do you see that scene the way I see it? I see it as iconic and one of the best I've ever seen because I love the music and the way the act.
Totally.
Like it's just to
Music,
me, it's like
yeah.
like there's no way you can improve that scene, Jason. There's no way.
Well, it's a good ending too, and it was like if you're gonna do it, like the ending of a season is so crucial. And at another show I was doing, I was trying to explain that, like how crucial this is. You don't want to button everything up. You want to leave people wanting desperately for the time to just cease and like bump to the next season. You want people just to yearn for that stuff. And there's a trick to it. There's an art form to leaving people wanting more, as opposed to like thinking you gotta button everything up and do this and make everybody happy. But you know what? The problem is when you try to make everybody happy, you're not making anybody fucking happy. You're just doing bad work. You know, like if everybody's supposed to like something, that means you're doing something so broad that it's probably not worth it. You know, like it's like the same thing with like bands. It's sort of like if everybody likes a certain band, well, maybe there's something a little boring about them, right? I mean, that's not fair to good bands like Zeppelin, for instance. A lot of people like Zeppelin, and I don't think they're doing anything wrong. I mean, sure, like it's funny. We talked about this. Me and my friend John 2 days ago. We were talking a little bit about Zeppelin and some of the fairy stuff that he would, sing about, some of the Lord of the Rings stuff, and it was sort of like we were laughing about it, kind of like going, well. Because we were talking about it in the 70s, how they got a lot of bad rap from reviewers and whatnot, and I think a lot of it had to do with that Hobbit shit, but they kind of just get a pass for singing about. It's like I don't care. I just kind of into that. I'll dive into that weird little world. They kind of did it right in a way. They were able to maneuver with it. But then also had these incredible pieces like Kashmir and these just like, wow, darkness and, just such rad stuff.
Jason, so these two bands I'm about to mention are so different. So Led Zeppelin couldn't be any more different from the Beatles, right?
Yeah.
Are they close to the Beatles as far as their greatness? I mean, listen, I get the Beatles.
They're totally different beasts. Totally different beasts.
They're totally different. But as far as talent, as to what they bring to the table in each of their own little genre pieces, are they close, you think?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think 100%. Jimmy Page, Jesus. I mean, innovator, what a
Bonham,
what a wrecking ball, Bonham, John Paul Jones. I had the luck to chat with John Paul Jones for hours in 2005, I think, or 2005, like at some Grammy Atlantic after party or something. And me and him just huckered away in the corner. There's a picture of me and him chatting. And we just talked production because he was getting into production, doing the Dotsons and stuff, I think, and some bands and stuff. So we just talked about those old recording techniques and their old records for hours. And it was like I was in heaven. Like there's people trying to drag me away, girls and this and that. It's like, I don't want to talk to anybody. Let me just talk to John Paul Jones. But I think absolutely. I mean, look, I'm a huge fan of John Lennon and George Harrison, especially their albums and their contributions to the Beatles stuff. But I also recognize without Paul's stuff and without Paul, they wouldn't have released probably half those records. I see why they also broke up. If you look at it's a fascinating thing to see what songs were the singles and what it would be like Strawberry Fields Forever was a B-side to one of John's songs. I mean, one of Paul's songs. Right. But Paul would always get the singles. And to be honest, those are songs I like a lot less. I just do. I'm not a Paul guy as much as a John and a George guy, but I appreciate all that he did to make all of that happen, because I think without him, they just wouldn't have had a lot of releases. I think the other guys were more like, they would have just, they didn't have the same work ethic. And you see it with Paul's amount of stuff that he's released with Wings, and even today that he's constantly doing stuff. But I think they were just different animals between Zeppelin and the Beatles. Just like the Stones are frankly just as good. And I'll listen to Stones records more than I'll listen to Beatles records, to be honest.
Wow.
Mostly because I'm there, because I like, again, All Things Must Pass, George's, first solo record. That's one of my favorite records of all time.
Yeah.
And all the John stuff I just adore, but there's too many Paul stuff to like that. I'd get kind of bored on, to be honest.
Right.
So, and Zeppelin has, I like darker things too. I hear the darkness in John's stuff. There's more earnestness in the Paul stuff. And in Zeppelin, Kashmir and the like, and there's darkness. And I like swimming in the shades of darkness for some reason. I'm just more of a darker dude, I guess.
Yeah.
Deep down, I like more complexity and just darker things,
It would have been nice to have seen Led Zeppelin go back on tour. I wish they put their differences aside, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Man, I got to tell you, I think your Mindhunter score is immensely underrated. As somebody who could comment on movie scores, how are people not making a big deal about some of this stuff? Like, it's a really solid, amazing score that is so super re-listenable. Like, you can listen to it running or in their car or doing whatever you have to do in life. Yeah, man. So I don't know. I just here to say thank you for that awesome score. It's phenomenal.
Well, it was where I kind of learned how to do it. And so it's interesting. Like I went back and started watching it again recently, or at least I watched the first, I think 4 episodes. I guess I watched 6, because I noticed even as I'm doing it, by the time episode, I think 5 or 6 comes around, I really figure it out. Like I really start catching my groove on where it should be. And there's these pieces where, I don't know how much you remember the show, but there's, when they go to the boyfriend that ends up like cutting her hair off, and she gets dumped at like a dump, and like it's like the brother and the sister, and they all kind of kill this girl in the tub and this and that. It's like there's a moment, this whole thing storyline, and it's those pieces where I really am like, okay, now I'm getting the groove of how the sound of this show, and I think it progressively gets better and better. Because in the early days and the early stuff of that score, when I first talked to David, it was like he was like talking about Bernard Herrmann. And I love Bernard Herrmann. He's one of my faves, especially his score on Taxi Driver. Yeah. But all his Hitchcock stuff is amazing. But he was talking like Psycho without the rant of the and so my early stuff was more trying to do a weird version of his stuff. I wasn't trying to do his stuff because honestly I can't do his stuff, and I'm also trying to do it all by myself because most of that score was all just done by myself. So and he has a big orchestra and this and that to work with, but there was a moment where, because I didn't see Picture for 8 months. Fincher called me in December about starting to work on it, and I didn't actually see the first scenes really until August. And so I'd been working on it though, trying to like figure out, just experiment. And it all became these sort of tangents, like ends of the score. Even that Bernard Herrmann stuff, but like, and it's not Bernard Herrmann stuff. It was just sort of like, I was kind of like more into that vibe, but I remember seeing the opening scene and writing a piece called Crime of the Century to it. And when I first did it, I scored it really long. And when you actually watch the scene, the music sort of like comes in and out.
Right.
And, but I had instantly been kind of going in one direction. And then I sent that, and the way I like to work, which I think is unlike how other guys, I write a piece and I send it off immediately to the director. And in Fincher's case, I did that. And in Fincher's great because he'll get back to me like that. He'll literally he'll be on set and 10 minutes later, he goes, I love it. Super cool, whatever.
Right.
And his response to this particular piece, Crime of the Century, was, I love it. Okay. Now we found the sound of the show. Now it all should work in this world. and that was pretty much what it was. But like I really started to like come on the sound of the score midway through, and then second season just I think is awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's thank you. I really appreciate it. I know it has a lot of diehard fans. The whole show has tons of diehard fans, and
the actors. I've had a couple actors who are on the show, and they love it too. Like I had Happy Anderson, who plays the guy who wears the high heels. He's terrific. You know, the big guy.
Which guy?
He's red hair. He wears the high heels. He likes to dress like a woman. Do you remember that guy? His name is
in Mindhunter.
Mindhunter, I think season 1.
Season 1.
He wore
that guy. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he just loved, they just loved working with. They said Fincher took a lot of takes, but they really loved working for him.
Yeah.
And I have so many people, like just talking casually, or I read something. Yeah. People are dying for a season 3, man. Like there's so much hot trash out there, and I feel like people were like we're given this like unbelievable, super watchable show, and then it's gone after 2 seasons. Like, but people are okay greenlighting this trash that costs millions and millions of dollars to make. Where Mindhunter, all the pieces are set for any story you want to tell for as long as you want to tell. I'm not saying you have to run it to a ground. It's not Grey's Anatomy, but like,
no, we all look. You're preaching to the choir because I would love to do another season. I think it was, and you know what? I don't know anything. Let me just preface this by saying I've hung out with David, many times, talked to him. The one thing David won't do is he'll play everything really close to his chest until it's 100% go. Yeah. Like he'll tell me all the things that he's working on, but I think this one has so much weight on it that if anybody hears that there's something coming out, it'll go all over. It'll spread like wildfire.
Yeah, it will.
If he is working on something, and I have no knowledge of this at all, if he is working on something sort of behind the scenes, because he's always got a million things in the fire, I wouldn't doubt it. Like that eventually there's enough people and enough fans at Netflix, enough people pushing the thing, and Fincher deciding he wants to do it, because it's a lot of it was literally he spent like 4 years in fucking Pennsylvania, which I don't think he wanted to do. So I don't know where the new episodes would be, but that probably would have a lot to do with whether or not he wants to make it, because you got to think about that. It's sort of like if you're going to make a film or a series that takes 2 years to make, you're going to spend, and you're filming it. And in his case, he's filming, I think he did like 4 episodes he did at least 2 the first thing, and I think 4 on the second season, but he's overseeing everything. And at a certain point, it all gets put into his lap. So it's all in his lap before, then he'll hire other directors to execute stuff, and he'll leave them a little bit of autonomy, and then they make an edit, and then it all comes to him, and they're out. And then he goes and might re-edit, re-film stuff, this and that. But it's always his baby, and it's a lot of work. And he puts everything he's got into it, and everybody does. That's the thing. That's why he's so good, is that he truly makes people put their best foot forward, because they know he's not half-assing. So when people know that you're working for somebody that's trying to do the best thing humanly possible and pushing always, it makes everybody around him try to do that. But I don't know. I think it might. I have actual faith that eventually there might be a Mindhunter season 3. Again, I have no inside information. I really don't. I only thing I know is it's an expensive show to make, as everything that Fincher does is, because he puts it all on the screen. Like he says this is going to cost this amount of money, and it's going to cost that amount of money, and it's not going into his pocket. It's going into making the best thing possible. And
but Jason, I guess that's my point. Like Netflix is kind of pumping, and I like Netflix, but they're pumping a lot of money into shows that have no future. So like if you took that money and you put it into a guarantee that people are going to love, I feel like it's a win-win for everybody.
I feel like enough time has gone by. Like, I think it would be a brilliant move on everybody's part. And
yes.
I don't know. I think at this point, it's whether or not Netflix wants to pony up what it will cost compared to say some of these other shows, which and then whether or not Fincher wants to do it. I think it comes down to those two elements. It's that simple. And if Fincher just feels like he can do it in a way to do it justice, it depends on him and again on the budget, on whether or not, because I know he doesn't like, if he says it's going to cost something, it's going to cost something, and don't come back and hassle him, because that'll really bug him. And he'll just kind of go, all right, I'm out, fuck off. Come back if you want to pay what it's going to cost, and it's not that he's putting it in his pocket, it's that he's putting it on the screen. So he just demands that if he's going to make something, he's going to make it good.
I get, man. Thank you for all this time. I have one last question for you. Thank you for this. So I think there's the three most iconic living composers right now are Thomas Newman, Hans Zimmer, and John Williams. Sure. If you could only keep the 2 out of the 3 of their work, who you taking? You can only, one has to go.
Well, it's tough. I mean, I think
it's a really hard. Like if somebody asked me this, I couldn't answer.
But you're also asking about just sort of like big time iconic guys. Like to be honest, I don't really care for John Zimmer stuff that much. Some of this stuff I like. Don't take me wrong. I actually really like him, and I love watching interviews with him and stuff. I like the dude a lot. Like I think I would get. I've never met him. I think I'd really get along with him, but maybe it's because he's so big that I'm like, fuck this, but
that's a philosophy you have for music too. When you like music, you remember you were talking about bands early on, where you talked about how people like bands, and 100%. You like you're always kind of a contrarian a little bit.
I'm always a contrarian. I have been since I was a little kid. So those are actually 3 composers that I could give a fuck about, to be honest. But at the same time, I recognize how freaking great John Williams is. Like these are like amazing, and it's fun to do the deep dives of listening to, I forgot the guy's name that influenced him so much, but there's a guy that some of those lines are like licked from these old scores. The guy that did, I think, Metropolis and stuff, like really old school. I don't know if you ever watched those where they go back and forth, so you could see who he was sort of aping. But I got no problem with aping. Like I'm into like people having influence, especially if they're older. I would never ape anything that's like 10 years or 20 years old, but 60 years old, sure. I'll get influenced by this old weird Italian score, or like I like Philip Sardi and like what's the guy's name? George De La Rue, like these weird like French dudes. I've got very influenced by, but I Thomas Newman, like he does great stuff too. Like I believe he did the only one I can really think of that he did is American Beauty, right?
Yep.
And that's a beautiful score. And
Shawshank, Road to Perdition, he did
great.
Yeah.
Again, these are like they're almost like too mainstream for me to do.
I get it.
But all really great people. And Hans, I have a little bit of like for instance, the Blade Runner 2. Massive Vangelis fan. I've been a massive Vangelis fan since I was a little kid. And a movie called Missing with Jack Lemmon. I loved the score for some reason at age like 13. And I loved The Bounty or Mutiny on the Bounty, depending on where you see it. Was so good from the 80s. Like that score is one of my favorites. And of course, Blade Runner is one of my favorites. And there's so much melody in the original Blade Runner. And the redo of Blade Runner, which I believe had something to do with Hans. I don't know what. I think there's a couple of guys. I think Johann worked on it as well. Johannes.
Yes, he's passed. If it's the guy, he's done a lot of Denis Villeneuve stuff. He would have been the guy.
I think he was originally doing Blade Runner. But there's the soundscape on the Han score without the melodic stuff, but you never know who that is going to be. Sometimes that's directors saying, I don't want this melodic stuff. So you can't always blame the composer, but because some of my best work has been taken out by directors where you're like, what are you doing? This is like the main melody, and they just want noise shaped air or something, something that sort of sounds like. But so so to really answer your question, I can't really, because I'm a little bit biased on those three. Like, again, like I don't want to go see a John Williams concert at the Hollywood Bowl, even though I recognize he's probably the most iconic, especially living composers of our day.
Right.
And I recognize his work as incredible. And I wish my career would be there. So I got nothing bad to say, but it's not like I listen to Star Wars or Superman or Indiana Jones. But to say again, it's like you hear one of those and it's just like, wow, like amazing. Like it's just perfect score work. And then Zimmer does some rad shit too. And again, I like his vibe. But it's, again, I'm a contrarian in that I want to run for that. So like anytime anybody asks me, like there was a film that I was doing in Italy that I ended up jumping off of because they just were constantly saying like, do something like Hans Zimmer. And it's just like, no, man, I'm going to do something like me and me fucking only. And I don't even know what that means, because I'm not going to do what I've done before. So don't ask me to do Mindhunter. Don't ask me to do anything I've ever done before. Just let me do something that I want to do. Yeah. And if you're going to tell me to try to do something like a modern dude doing, it's like, come on, man. Especially
that's weird.
Like
yeah.
It's a Budweiser idea. It's like making me like asking me to do something like, you know, like that's the biggest guy around.
Yeah.
That's just obnoxious. It's not, and stupid from a standpoint of a filmmaker, you know, because I don't like to work in temp too. And luckily I started with Fincher, who doesn't work in temp either. So like he won't temp out a scene with other people's music. The only time you ever see a scene with Fincher is with the music that I've written, if I'm working on it. And I'm sure it's the same way when Trent and Atticus work, that he only cuts to their work. So it's like, and not past work, only the work you've done for this particular thing, so that you get an original thought. Because if you put in Hans Zimmer in a scene and say, do something like this, well, you've already stifled the composer, you know, like they can't unhear something. They hear a drive. Another thing with a lot of the Hans stuff, I fucking hate all this tribal shit that goes in the back of these scores. And and Hans is one of the big guys that invented that thing in a way. And and kudos for him doing that. I like originators. Like I like original thinkers, and he's an original thinker, and he's done epic stuff. Don't get me wrong. But he's also the reason why there's so many freaking copycats that have all this tribal shit in all their music.
A lot of copycats, yeah.
Totally. It's a million of it. So like, it's the same thing going back to our Eddie Van Halen or this or that. When everybody's doing something and I'm just coming up in that world, I'm instantly going to be like, well, fuck that stuff. Fuck that stuff. It's not like fuck them. It's just like, fuck that as influencing me. And you know what?
100%.
I also saw an interview with Eddie that I was sort of like, this was one of the things that actually made me really love it, where he was talking about this was probably in the 2008-ish or 10 even or something like that, where he's doing an interview and it was like, what was the last CD you bought or like music you bought? And it was something from like 1984 or something. I forgot what it was that he mentioned, but he's like, I don't really listen to music because I'm busy making it. And to be honest, that's kind of the same way I am. I'll go into phases listening to music, but for the most part, I'm not listening to it because I'm always making it. So like,
sure.
So you don't, and you also got to be careful on what you listen to because it'll influence you, and for better or for worse. And so like, I don't personally want to get influenced by too much stuff. I just kind of want to like find stuff and be surprised. And if I'm going to get an influence, it's got to be something obscure and weird. And it's got to be just a tiny little sliver of it, not like a whole thing, you know?
Yeah. Earlier when you said Trent and Atticus, you were talking about Reznor and Ross, right?
Yeah.
I thought they're very talented composers.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm just hoping that they'll die soon so I can do all of Phil Fincher's work. I'm just kidding. Yeah, they're great. I love them, and they're super nice guys. And they do great work. Like their work in The Killer with Fincher recently was awesome. I thought it was super. I mean, such a great movie.
Yeah, before I let you go, man, what is around the corner for you? I know you got Dark Matter, you got some stuff out. Is there anything around the corner that you want to talk about?
Well, Dark Matter just released, which on Apple TV, on March 8th. I love that show. It turned out really great. it's a really fun watch, and it's a really great one. Matter of fact, it's #1 on Apple TV right now, which is great.
Right.
And then I also did a show called Them on Amazon that came out on April 25th. That's doing really well as well. It's like got 100% reviewers on Rotten Tomatoes, which actually surprised me.
Yeah.
And 97 like audience review. So there's that. There's a movie that I did called Magazine Dreams that I think is such an amazing movie. We'll see what happens with it, because right before it was set to come out, there was all this like Oscar buzz and stuff, but it starred Jonathan Majors, who had a little bit of a falling out with society when he got accused of domestic violence with his girlfriend at the time. And so he sort of got, as they say, canceled. And now that movie's just been put on hold, but the score is one of my favorite bits of music I've ever done in my life. And so I really hope it eventually comes out. I'm sure it will, maybe not to fanfare and certainly not Oscar now, because that's all gets so political that I can't see it coming out. But like,
doesn't that suck, Jason? Somebody's terrible decision making, it has a ripple effect where it affects like a lot of lives, not just their own.
Well,
like,
yeah, well, it's a real shame too, because the filmmakers, this young black filmmaker, there's a second named Elijah Bynum, and he wrote it and directed it, and it was a second movie, and he got all these sort of grants to do the film and different financing in all these ways, and worked really hard and had impeccable taste about the music, about the film, about everything. He just had, it was just his baby, and it was so great. And literally, it was just, we aired it at Sundance. I did the score in 3 weeks, because
wow.
they brought me on after another guy was sort of pushed out or something happened with the first guy. And then so they had to release it in early January with Sundance, and I got brought in like December 1st, and
wow.
or like around Thanksgiving or something, you know. But anyway, so I did it really quick, but it's one of my favorite scores. But it's a real shame, because the filmmaker, this was his shot, and everybody was talking Oscar stuff about, for Jonathan Majors and for the director, for the score, for everything. It was like Oscar buzz, all the buzz at Sundance 2 years ago. And then it just got shelved. Yeah, like, because in March is what it happened. And you know what? And I've seen some of the footage. I have my opinions about it. Like, but I don't know what went down. But it's like but it was like a white woman chasing like this black guy down the streets for like street after street after street. If it was the opposite, you know, it would like a black guy chasing a white woman. It was like she was definitely the instigator in the stuff. Now, what went down behind closed doors, I don't know. But like,
right.
in what's on video, it's like crazy. It's like this woman is like, you know, chasing him for street. He's trying to run away from her. So to me, I feel like he got railroaded in a way, but again, I don't know all the stuff. I have no idea. You know, he played a bodybuilder in the film, and so he was all jacked up. And so I'm sure that didn't help the dynamic of how it looked,
right.
You know?
Right.
And I don't I don't know anything about it, but it is a shame, because it's such a good film. So hopefully that'll come out eventually. I don't think there's anything else in the pipeline yet, because of so I've been working on like my solo record, and I'm about to do a Louis XIV show, which my old band, we're getting back together after tons of years.
Nice.
To play a show. And then my band, even before that, before Louis, like that was the late 90s, or like into 2003 is when we broke up. We're even playing a show in August as well. That'll be fun. But so I just kind of working on like my own new music and stuff, and just kind of been taking some time off, to be honest, because the strikes last year kind of made everything slow down at a time when I actually really wanted to slow down, because for about 10 years was just kind of constantly juggling film score after film score after film score, or series score. So I'm kind of ready. I've been ready to take a long break, and I pretty much have since January. The last thing I did was this with Fincher, and it's now May. So
Yeah.
I've been having fun like gardening and painting and renovating the studio and working on my solo record and like all that sort of stuff. Just been kind of having a really grand time. So, but I'm sure things will pick back up really soon. So.
That's awesome. And you are a super fun interview. And I really appreciate you giving me your time today, Jason. And yeah, man.
Anytime. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All the best to you, my friend.